Hello, my friends. I will speak plainly and without ornament, because the gravity of what has occurred demands clarity rather than theatrics. Over the past 24 hours, the most consequential development has been the Russian government's assertion that Ukraine attempted a large-scale drone attack on President Vladimir Putin's Valdai residence near Novgorod during the night of December 28-29. According to Moscow, this was not a minor incident, not a provocation at the margins, but a direct terrorist attack aimed at the head of the Russian state. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that 91 long-range unmanned aerial vehicles were launched by what he described as the criminal Kiev regime, and that all were destroyed by Russian air defense systems. He made clear that such reckless actions would not go unanswered, that retaliatory targets had already been selected, and that while Russia did not intend to abandon negotiations with the United States, its negotiating position would inevitably be revised. Shortly thereafter, the Russian Ministry of Defense released a detailed operational breakdown describing interceptions across Bryansk, Smolensk, and Novgorod regions, again emphasizing that the drones were neutralized before reaching the presidential residence. Western commentators have tried to seize upon minor discrepancies in drone counts as evidence that the incident never occurred. This is unserious. Anyone who has worked in or around large government systems understands that preliminary reports often differ before agencies reconcile data. Such discrepancies neither prove nor disprove the event itself. They simply reflect the normal flow of information inside a vast bureaucracy responding to an unfolding security incident. The matter became far more revealing when Yuri Ushakov, President Putin's foreign policy aide, disclosed details of a follow-up phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. This call occurred after Trump's meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky in Mar-a-Lago, and it was part of an agreed process whereby Washington would brief Moscow on the substance of those talks. During that call, Putin informed Trump that immediately after what Washington considered a successful round of discussions with Kiev, Ukraine launched a mass drone attack against the Russian president's residence. According to Ushakov, Trump was shocked, genuinely outraged by this information. He reportedly described the action as irrational and acknowledged that it would inevitably affect Washington's approach towards Zelensky. Putin, for his part, made 2 points unmistakably clear. Russia would respond militarily, and Russia would reassess any concessions previously contemplated in negotiations. At the same time, Moscow reiterated its willingness to continue serious diplomatic engagement with the United States in pursuit of a genuine peace. This brings us to the central question that Western media desperately wants to avoid. Did the attack actually take place? Kiev categorically denies it. Western European outlets, particularly British media, have accepted those denials without skepticism. France 24 claims there is no evidence. But this argument collapses the moment one looks beyond the narrow question of visual proof and examines the broader, well-documented pattern of Ukrainian behavior. Only days earlier, on Christmas Day, Zelensky addressed the Ukrainian public and declared, "Today we all share one dream, may he perish." The British Daily Telegraph itself acknowledged that this was a reference to President Putin. There is no ambiguity here. Zelensky publicly expressed a desire for Putin's death mere days before the alleged attack. Beyond rhetoric, Ukraine has an established record of conducting assassinations on Russian territory. Russian generals, some retired, have been killed in Moscow and elsewhere. Civilians, including the daughter of a prominent Russian intellectual, have been murdered. Western media has gradually conceded Ukrainian involvement in such operations, and on occasion, Ukrainian officials themselves have effectively confirmed it. Media outlets that track casualties, in cooperation with institutions like the BBC, even count Russian personnel assassinated inside pre-2022 Russian territory as casualties of the conflict. Furthermore, Ukrainian intelligence chief Kirill Budanov has openly admitted in interviews that Ukraine has attempted unsuccessfully to assassinate President Putin in the past. One such attempt almost certainly corresponds to the 2023 drone incident at the Kremlin, where a UAV struck the roof of the Senate Palace, the very building that houses Putin's office. Taken together, Zelensky's public wish for Putin's death, Ukraine's proven history of assassinations and admissions of prior attempts on Putin's life, this constitutes a compelling body of circumstantial evidence. It does not rely on Russian statements alone. It demonstrates capability, intent, and precedent. In that context, dismissing the Valdai attack as fabrication is not analysis, it is willful blindness. Russia, of course, will respond. Lavrov and the Defense Ministry have been explicit. The question is how. Russia now fields advanced weapon systems, including hypersonic missiles reportedly deployed in both Russia and Belarus. From Belarusian territory, strikes on Kiev would allow virtually no warning time. Large fixed targets, energy infrastructure, barracks, command facilities are obvious options. There is also a strong probability that Russian intelligence and security agencies will target Ukrainian officials directly responsible for planning and executing such operations. What Russia will not do, in my assessment, is target Zelensky himself. This is not restraint born of sentiment, but cold strategic logic. Zelensky has become Russia's most useful adversary. His mismanagement of the war, his obsession with public relations over battlefield realities, and his habit of antagonizing even his Western patrons have all worked to Moscow's advantage. Russia has made it clear that it ultimately seeks profound political change in Kiev. Zelensky's behavior increasingly provides the international justification for that outcome. Global reaction matters here. Trump has expressed clear disapproval of Kiev's actions. India, Pakistan, China, the UAE, and multiple Arab states have voiced concern. Europe may remain silent, but the rest of the world is not. Under these conditions, Russia has no incentive to squander diplomatic momentum by assassinating Zelensky. Leaving him in place accelerates Ukraine's internal political decay and strengthens Moscow's argument that the Kiev regime is reckless, dangerous, and illegitimate. Russia has also raised the possibility of Western involvement in the attack. No public evidence has been presented, but this concern cannot be dismissed outright. Ukraine has conducted complex operations far beyond its independent technical capacity, including attacks on oil tankers thousands of kilometers from its shores. Such actions almost certainly required external assistance. Whether Britain, France, or rogue elements within larger systems played a role remains unproven. But the pattern is troubling. The logic behind the attack itself reveals Ukraine's desperation. Militarily, Ukraine is losing ground despite official denials. Russian advances are documented visually and relentlessly. Economically, Ukraine is collapsing. Western funding is slowing. Loans come with conditions Kiev dislikes. And Zelensky is increasingly frantic about money, especially for drones and weapons production. Diplomatically, Washington has made clear that it is no longer interested in ceasefires as cover for Ukrainian rearmament. The message delivered to Zelensky in Mar-a-Lago was blunt: comprehensive peace or nothing. Faced with military defeat, economic exhaustion, and waning Western patience, Zelensky lashed out, attempting to strike Putin, believing, perhaps mistakenly, that he was present at Valdai, fits the logic of a cornered regime. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, but it was not irrational given the pressures Kiev faces. Finally, this incident must be viewed within the broader diplomatic realignment now underway. Russia has returned openly to its December 2021 security proposals: Ukrainian neutrality, demilitarization, recognition of new territorial realities, and a fundamental restructuring of Europe's security architecture. Washington's own strategic documents now prioritize stability and de-escalation with Russia. Quiet discussions are clearly occurring, and it is precisely this prospect peace on Russian terms that terrifies Kiev and panics European elites. In that sense, the attack on the Valdai residence is not an anomaly. It is the violent symptom of a regime realizing that time, money, and power are slipping away. Russia understands this. The world increasingly understands this. And whatever form Russia's response ultimately takes, one thing is certain: the strategic trajectory now overwhelmingly favors Moscow. If we step back from the immediacy of the Valdai incident and examine it within the deeper structural logic of this war, the picture becomes even clearer and far more damning for Kiev. What we are witnessing is not an isolated act of recklessness, but the culmination of a long process in which Ukraine's leadership has steadily replaced strategy with spectacle, governance with improvisation, and diplomacy with theatrics. At its core, the attempted strike on President Putin's residence reflects a profound asymmetry between how Russia and Ukraine understand power. Russia approaches war as a comprehensive state endeavor. Military operations synchronized with diplomacy, economic resilience, internal stability, and long-term geopolitical objectives. Ukraine, by contrast, increasingly treats war as a public relations campaign, one in which symbolic gestures are substituted for sustainable military outcomes. Zelensky's fixation on optics has been visible for months. Time and again, battlefield realities have been subordinated to what he believes will play well in Western capitals. Withdrawals are delayed not because they are militarily unsound, but because they would look bad diplomatically. Losses are denied even as video evidence circulates globally. This approach has not merely failed, it has actively worsened Ukraine's position by locking its leadership into decisions that maximize political exposure while minimizing military flexibility. The Valdai attack fits squarely into this pattern. From a military standpoint, it achieves nothing. Even if successful, it would not reverse Russian advances, restore Ukraine's shattered manpower pool, or resurrect an economy sustained almost entirely by external lifelines. From a diplomatic standpoint, it is catastrophic. Assassination attempts against heads of state, especially nuclear-armed ones, are universally regarded as escalatory acts of terrorism. They do not generate sympathy. They generate fear and revulsion. This is precisely why Russia's reaction has been measured rather than emotional. Moscow does not need to rush. Time is on its side. Russia's industrial base is expanding, its defense production is accelerating, and its economy, despite sanctions, has proven more adaptable than almost any Western planner anticipated. Ukraine, by contrast, is burning through its remaining political and economic capital at an alarming rate. Equally important is the shifting global context. The war in Ukraine no longer occupies the singular moral space it once did in Western discourse. Conflicts in the Middle East, tensions in East Asia, and domestic political crises across Europe and the United States are crowding it out. Governments that once echoed Kiev's every demand now speak in the language of fatigue, prioritization, and limits. This is not ideological betrayal. It is strategic triage. Russia understands this dynamic intimately. That is why Moscow has consistently framed its objectives not as conquest, but as the restoration of a security architecture that existed before NATO's eastward expansion. Whether one agrees with this framing or not, it resonates with many non-Western states that view NATO's post-Cold War behavior as destabilizing rather than defensive. For them, Russia's demands are not radical, they are corrective. Zelensky's problem is that this global audience is no longer persuaded by moral absolutism. Calls for more weapons and more money ring hollow when paired with evidence of corruption, repression of political opposition, suppression of religious institutions, and the indefinite suspension of elections. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes to argue that Ukraine represents democratic virtue rather than wartime expediency. This is where regime legitimacy becomes decisive. Russia has been explicit. Any post-war settlement must involve elections and a leadership in Kiev capable of claiming genuine popular authority. This is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a strategic necessity. Moscow will not accept security guarantees from a government whose mandate expired under martial law and whose survival depends entirely on foreign patronage. The irony is that Zelensky himself has made Russia's case easier. By escalating covert operations, endorsing rhetoric that normalizes assassination, and embracing tactics indistinguishable from terrorism, Kiev increasingly resembles the very threat Russia claims it must neutralize. For countries like India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and even parts of Africa, this distinction matters. These states may not align with Russia ideologically, but they value predictability and sovereignty, and they distrust regimes that appear unanchored by law or restraint. From this perspective, leaving Zelensky in place is not mercy, it is strategy. As long as he remains, Ukraine's internal contradictions deepen. Elites maneuver for position as funding tightens. Public confidence erodes as losses mount. Military commanders clash with political leadership over impossible demands. Each month that passes under these conditions weakens Kiev's bargaining position further. The Valdai incident also exposes a final, uncomfortable truth. Ukraine's leadership may no longer fully control the escalatory ladder. When a state becomes dependent on external intelligence, external logistics, and external financing, its autonomy erodes. Decisions are shaped not only by national interest, but by the incentives and agendas of those supplying the means of war. Whether or not Western actors directly assisted in this operation, the mere plausibility of such involvement underscores how compromised Ukrainian sovereignty has become. Russia, by contrast, retains strategic coherence. Its red lines are clearer. Its objectives are stable. Its leadership does not need dramatic gestures to maintain domestic legitimacy. That asymmetry is decisive, and it explains why Moscow can afford patience while Kiev cannot. In the end, the attempted attack on Putin's residence is less about Russia than it is about Ukraine's accelerating collapse as a strategic actor. It signals desperation, not strength. It confirms that Kiev sees no viable path forward within the constraints of conventional diplomacy or battlefield realities. And it reinforces the conclusion that this war will not end through symbolic acts or media narratives, but through hard political restructuring, most likely on Russia's terms. History is unforgiving to leaders who confuse attention with power. Zelensky's tragedy is that he appears to have done exactly that. Russia's advantage is that it never made that mistake. If there is a final lesson to be drawn from the attempted attack on President Putin's Valdai residence, it is this. Wars are not decided by spectacle, nor by desperation, nor by acts born of panic. They are decided by endurance, coherence, and the ability to align military power with political reality. In this respect, the contrast between Russia and Ukraine could not be sharper. Russia enters the next phase of this conflict with its strategic foundations intact. Its leadership understands what it wants, why it wants it, and how long it is prepared to wait to achieve it. Moscow has never treated this war as a sprint. From the outset, it framed the conflict as a long-term struggle to correct what it views as a catastrophic post-Cold War imbalance in European security. Every major Russian move, military, diplomatic, economic, has been consistent with that framework. Nothing about the Valdai incident changes this trajectory. If anything, it reinforces it. Ukraine, by contrast, now appears trapped in a cycle of self-inflicted escalation. Each failure on the battlefield is answered not with adaptation, but with louder demands. Each diplomatic setback is met not with compromise, but with provocation. The attack on Putin's residence was not the act of a confident state pursuing victory. It was the act of a leadership that senses the ground collapsing beneath its feet. This is why the reaction of the wider world matters so much. Outside the narrow echo chamber of Western European media, there is growing unease about Kiev's conduct. States that value stability, India, China, Brazil, much of the global south are watching closely. They see a government that has suspended elections indefinitely, criminalized dissent, weaponized religion, and now appears willing to cross the most dangerous red lines of all: direct assassination attempts against a nuclear-armed head of state. For these countries, the moral narrative that once surrounded Ukraine is eroding fast. Russia understands this erosion and is quietly capitalizing on it. By exercising restraint where others would lash out, Moscow is reinforcing the image of a state that, whatever one thinks of its policies, behaves rationally under pressure. That matters enormously in international politics. Legitimacy is not conferred by slogans. It is earned through predictability and discipline. The most bitter irony is that Zelensky's actions are accelerating the very outcome he claims to fear. Every reckless operation, every theatrical gesture, every refusal to confront reality strengthens Russia's argument that Ukraine, as currently governed, cannot be a stable neighbor. Regime change in Kiev, once a controversial notion, is steadily being normalized as a practical necessity. Not because Russia demands it alone, but because Ukraine's leadership is proving incapable of governing responsibly under the conditions it has created. And yet, Russia does not need to force this outcome hastily. Time is doing the work, funding streams are tightening, Western unity is fraying, Ukrainian manpower is exhausted, public confidence is cracking. Inside Kiev, political actors are already calculating what comes after Zelensky, not whether he can still prevail. This is what strategic defeat looks like long before a formal surrender is signed. The attack on the Valdai residence will be remembered not as a turning point against Russia, but as a moment of self-revelation for Ukraine's leadership. It revealed fear masquerading as resolve, anger substituting for strategy, and impulse standing in for governance. It showed a regime that no longer believes it can win the war as it is, and therefore seeks to change the game through shock. Russia, however, has no interest in playing that game. Its strength lies precisely in refusing to be dragged into emotional escalation. The Kremlin will respond, but on its own terms, at a time and place of its choosing, and in a manner that advances its long-term objectives rather than satisfying short-term outrage. In the end, wars are decided not by who shouts the loudest or strikes the most dramatic blow, but by who remains standing when the noise fades. The Valdai incident makes one thing unmistakably clear. Russia is planning for the post-war order, while Ukraine is struggling to survive the present. That asymmetry, more than any missile or drone, is what will ultimately determine how this conflict ends. History will not remember this episode as the moment Russia faltered. It will remember it as the moment Ukraine's leadership exposed the limits of its own strategy, and in doing so, hastened the outcome it sought so desperately to avoid.